Welcome to Off the Court, a show dedicated to making you the best version of yourself as a player and as a person. I'm Coach Jack, CEO and owner of Close the Gate Hoops. If you're trying to take your life and game to the next level, this is the podcast for you. Let's get it. What up?
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. I'm doing good. How are you?
Doing great, man. Doing great. Good to see you.
I think it's working. This is a better start than it was the last time we talked.
Cool. Yeah, I'm on my iPad, so that's a little change, and then I got obviously the new room, so awesome. Wi-Fi should be all good.
Why don't you let the listeners know of Off the Court, kind of your story, and your background, and why you first decided to get into training, how you got into basketball in general, and elaborate from there.
Sounds great. Yeah, so I'm from Appleton, Wisconsin. Grew up around the game. Absolutely loved it. I played baseball and basketball growing up. Those are kind of my two sports, and those are the two sports I played in high school. And so my dad was actually a high school baseball coach, so I kind of grew up around him, and definitely learned just overall coaching philosophies from him, and being around his team. And baseball was just a little slower than I would have liked, more or less. I mean, I still played it and I still enjoyed it, but my heart was more in basketball. And I also felt, maybe it's just like kind of the rigor of the game or you name it, but I felt like it kind of had broader, horizons in terms of just like life skills. I felt like I built more life skills with that. And so, yeah, played on the varsity team there for 3 years, and, loved it. It was my life, and, still lifelong friends with a lot of my teammates today. But just like a lot of athletes and like a lot of the players I'm working with now, kind of that junior year-ish, kind of ultimately made, the decision is like, do I keep playing, or do I look to, play in college? How are things going? And so, kind of debated, playing at maybe a real small school, but ultimately just academically, I felt like just because I didn't know what I wanted to do, I felt like Madison, once I got in, was kind of my best route there. And so, chose to go to UW-Madison and had a great experience there. But, and I know we talked about this last time, but very shortly, kind of into my days in Madison, I found this court kind of in the basement of one of their big rec facilities, and I was just working myself out, and it was a great just stress relief from school and everything else, and like I love training. And it was like 8 months into my college career doing this. Is like, okay, why am I doing this? Is it to be the best intramural player ever, or is it because you genuinely have extreme passion for this? And so, that's where I really dove into training, and dove into realizing shoot, I maybe didn't train, I trained hard, but I didn't train very smart in high school. Looking back, a lot of times it was just, myself in the gym, or my dad just rebounding and me shooting, 500 spot shots or something like that. And so, so from there, it kind of took off, and it's hard being in college where, you don't have a car or don't have things like that, but I knew training would be something that I'd like to pursue down the road. And so I finished my career. It got kind of halfway through my senior year in college. COVID hit, and so I moved back home. And like a lot of people were just like, what do I do with my time? And so I thought, that's a perfect opportunity where I had some connections still back at home. And reached out and said, hey, if there's any players who are looking to, get workouts in outside, the court that I grew up playing on, my neighbor's little half court, in their backyard. That's kind of where I started doing some of my first sessions. And I think I told you this last time too. The girls' high school coach from my high school, their son is Joey LaChapelle, and then Emily LaChapelle, who just committed to Marquette. And so those were kind of my first two clients. And so we'd be doing outdoor workouts. And then also we had this warehouse that we'd, wheel in a hoop, and basically just do training sessions in like a carpeted warehouse. And so I always say, if you've seen the episode of The Office, it reminds me of the warehouse
the basement.
Game. Exactly. Yeah, that's awesome. Exactly. So yeah, from there, I mean, just like pretty much every training, you start with one or two people, and they tell two more people, and from there I've really taken off. And so I did move back to Madison for another job, and I knew that I wanted to continue training part-time, and ultimately that job was not as fun as basketball training. So once I could kind of make it full-time, I made that jump.
Yes. So you are full time then right now, 100%, right?
Yeah, yep. I've been full time for a little bit over a year now.
That's
So,
awesome. That is awesome. So I actually wrote a couple things down. That's a great story that you have there. And the first thing I was going to write, so you were debating, so you became a basketball trainer in college, but you were debating it in high school, if I recall that correctly. Or did you have
um,
no idea?
no, I mean, I loved like the training aspect. It was more so in college when I realized, like very early in college, where I was like, okay, I love this training thing. And at that point, it was like, what do I have to work for? I mean, I was playing intramurals. One of my best friends was the club manager, so I played a couple of club tournaments, but more or less it was for fun. It's not like I was competing at a super high level, and so that's when I was hoping to keep learning, and ultimately kind of just took my whole college experience and COVID as just how much can I learn about training, and how can I better myself to eventually better other athletes.
Yes. And I think the best thing you talked about there during your story was training hard versus training smart, because I was the exact same way. All
Yeah,
I cared about was working harder than the other person. It didn't matter what I was doing. As long as I was in the gym for a longer period of time, putting in more work than the other person, I felt good about myself. You know what I mean?
right.
And that's why I think trainers have become more and more valuable, because people are starting to realize that, like, when you narrow down what you actually have to work on, you can drastically increase your skills in a much shorter period of time versus just relying on work ethic. And that goes with everything, right? You cannot just rely on work ethic. You have to be smart about which directions you're picking to improve yourself. But I thought that was your best point, because I did the exact same thing in high school.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's super common. And just like you said, I think it's all about efficiency. I mean, we all have 24 hours in a day, and you're really, you're probably working out for, one to two of those. So kind of the most you can maximize out of those, that short amount of time is key, like you said.
Mm-hmm. So one question I have for you is kind of, so what did you do to, once you started to realize you wanted to become a basketball trainer, like you said, not just playing for intramurals, but what did you
Yeah.
do to kind of learn about basketball training? Because learning, even if you're not going to become a basketball trainer, as a player, it's smart to kind of frame your mind that way, because that can start to improve efficiency, like you were saying.
100%. And I think that's great for all players, to kind of think like a trainer, and I'm trying to to be as open with the players I work with, just like you were saying, so they see why are we doing this, or why
Mm-hmm.
am I structuring it that way. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I kind of just thought of it as almost like another class in
Yep.
college, where it was like just strictly my own research.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of big name trainers on Instagram and things like that, where I'd pull bits and pieces from them. But also, I think in every trainer's journey, it's awesome to learn from other people, but also there's that point. It's like you got to be you too. So it's like, I still kind of toe that line. It's like, okay, I want to take bits and pieces from everyone, and what I like and dislike, and learn from them. But also, there's something to be said about just being creative, as well as one thing I've been doing a lot recently is just like working myself out and just trying to like go through various game situations and make myself make mistakes. And I found that that's really enhanced my creativity in terms of planning sessions. But yeah, and I know that's kind of a broad answer, but besides just like putting in the time in, watching film and learning from other trainers, I did kind of have the opportunity, once I decided like, okay, I'm going to start working with players. I really wanted to just shadow as many trainers as I could. So I shadowed and got to know a bunch of trainers in the Appleton area. And then also was extremely lucky to meet Reed Osi, and he's been a phenomenal mentor of mine. He's a trainer in Minneapolis. I mean, the very first time I met him, 2 seconds later, in was Andrew Wiggins, and I'm
Really?
helping out. Yeah, I'm helping out a session with Wiggins, and so that was just a phenomenal experience. And we still talk monthly to this day, and he's helped me from everywhere in terms of the player development side on the court, as well as some of the business side, because pretty soon you realize you can be a great trainer, but then it's like, okay, how do I actually make this doable, if this is what you're looking to do. So
No, that is absolutely awesome advice. So the biggest things I took away from that were, one, connections, like you said, getting to know other trainers is really smart, not just to take away what you learn from them, but also, doors that they could open for you.
Right.
So I thought that was an awesome point. And then the other thing I took away from that, your aspect of, people always talk about if you're not first, you're last, right? And I kind of see the flip side of that. When you're later to the game, you can get perspectives from everybody. And then, like you said, kind of build your own version of you, right? Instead of being so one-sided to start. I think that's a huge advantage when trainers kind of have perspectives and use all these different angles to create their own opinion, right? And because everyone's going to train differently, even though it seems the same. Because like you said, it's going to have their own spin of, you version. That's also a good way to piggyback into basketball training methods. So do you want to kind of talk about what you think is the most efficient way for players to train in terms of improving their game?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's hard because it's so broad, and
Yes.
everyone has different philosophies there. But yeah, I mean, I think there's just a few really universal skills that every player should have. And so a lot of times I'll start with those, especially with some of the younger players. So one of the things that I really focus on is footwork. I think just having elite footwork is just going to unlock, every part of your game, more or less. Can you get to spots without traveling at the rim, mid-range and into your jump shot. So that's one really big thing I focus on. And I mean, the same can be said with ball handling. I mean, if you're a better ball handler, that's going to improve your pickups into your shot and things like that. So like one of the big things that I focus on really early on in sessions is just like the drop footwork or being able to play out of a split stance. I think a lot of players, want to play with their feet parallel or play, super narrow where it doesn't allow them to, get to angles and ultimately, be as efficient with their feet and as quick as they can be. So that's really one thing I focus on. For more of the elite players that I work with, I mean, that's more so Drew Hanlon uses the phrase trim the fat. And I think that's like such a good analogy where it's like, okay, a good varsity player, we're maybe getting in 2 to 3 sessions a week, which just like we were talking about earlier, it's not that much time. So instead of focusing on 40 things, let's focus on 1 to 2 things this off season that we want to get really, really good at. And so that's kind of the approach that I take with more of the higher level players.
Yeah, I think that's super smart. And that's something I've been kind of embracing myself lately, is embracing slow growth. Because I used to always be like efficiency, maximize everything, right? But if you just embrace that slow growth from day to day, it feels like you're not getting any results, but you'll look back in months and years and you're like, dang, that did a lot for me. So I totally agree with you in terms of that trim the fat analogy. Personally, and I talked a little bit about this last time, but I totally agree with your footwork being the most important. I would probably rank shooting, in my opinion, higher, just because if you can't shoot, you are so limited with all the other things in basketball. But then I would agree with you. Footwork's definitely the next thing, just because handles and finishing kind of tie into, obviously they're their own separate things, but tie into footwork in itself, and then defense. And that's kind of how we run our camps around, or normally around those 3 subjects. And then obviously we have more, we go into more detail, like, ball handling, touch around the rim, things of that nature. But I totally agree with you in terms of footwork. And I like that you talked about wide and narrow. That is the number one difference between girls and youth players and guys basketball, is girls play very narrow. And what happens with this is when you're not wide, one, you can get into really good shin angles in terms of exploding past your defender. And when you're thin, right, your shin angle is creating a way to go through the defense when they're right in front of you. But when we get really wide, we can get outside and around defenders' hips. But I totally agree. Like, that's the biggest thing with footwork, is being able to be wide and explosive out of those positions.
Yeah, no, exactly. I couldn't agree more. I usually have players like if they're just getting in their drop stance and it's super narrow, it's like, okay, like try to cross over with your feet, almost stacked on top of each other. I mean, you have no shift to your game. It just really allows you to shift your weight. And I think that's awesome. I also love how you prioritize shooting. I totally agree that it's the most important skill. The reason why I don't say that I work on it the most is because I try to be like just like we talked about with the openness with our players. There's a lot of players that come to me just for the skill work. So it's like, and I'll ask them, it's like, hey, how many times a week do you shoot? If it's 0, like, okay, let's definitely get a ton of shots up here because you need those reps. But if you're shooting on the shooting machine, 4 times a week at your high school, and then coming to me on top of it, okay, we're not doing any spot shots. You're doing that on your own. So that's definitely one like transformation that I've made, just from day one to now, is just like be open, learn the most amount you can. And I think then you can definitely like just provide the most value in that sense.
I totally agree. Cause I always tell my kids, I'm like, I am not going to repeat a lot of things, because everything I show you, I expect you to do outside of this. And then we can continue to stack skills. Right. Because there's no point in you coming to me. And like we talked about this earlier, block training, like shooting 50 shots from this spot and then the next spot and then the next spot. Like that does nothing for the kid, because they can do that on their own time when find their parents to rebound for them. Right. The purpose of them coming to you is to learn and build new skills that they wouldn't have been able to do if they didn't come to you. So I totally agree with that statement in terms of what you were saying.
Yeah, that's so well put. I always just say, like, I'm not a shooting machine. You can find those elsewhere. It's like,
exactly.
And not to say that I don't work shooting. I mean, there's been a lot of like shot transformations that I have worked on with players, and something that I feel a lot more confident now as well. But yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, we're trainers, not rebounders.
Yeah, that's an awesome point. You have written down here structured versus unstructured plans. Do you kind of want to elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really relates to the block versus variable training, like you said. And a lot of it has to do just kind of how I plan sessions. And I'd be curious to hear how you go about planning your sessions. I mean, I know a lot of it depends on just how many people are in the group, if it's an individual, all that stuff. And I've been doing more and more group sessions, but I definitely really started off with a ton of individual and 2-person sessions. So for me, like my very first sessions, I remember coming in, I had like a note card in my pocket, and I still do that a lot, where I'll write down, the 3-4 bullet points that I really want to focus on in that session, but I used to almost like script everything. And like very, very quickly you realize, okay, like maybe it's time-based, or maybe, like pretty soon you're off the script, but I realized that a lot of times that's better, that's good. And so now what I kind of do is I'll take those bullet points and make sure we focus on those. So for instance, maybe we're just working like a punch drag. Like the other day I worked, solely a punch drag with someone. So that part's structured, but ultimately kind of what they, the different finishes and the different, maybe we're angling out to a pull up, or maybe we're crossing over and finishing at the rim, that type of thing. You can kind of vary the levels of structure within the plan. And so that's one big thing I have gotten better at. And I think having, a deliberate structured plan that's focused on their development, that's, different than, Johnny, the 6th grader coming in versus, Gavin, the 11th grader, kind of falls into the blocked versus variable training as well.
Yeah. So that's awesome. So in terms of how I do it, so we have a curriculum where it's based around 9 core skills, and it's kind of like what we were talking about earlier. It's more than just footwork and shooting. But we base that around, I call it red, yellow, and green. So red would be, a really, really young player. He's just starting. Yellow's kind of in the middle, and then green's like high school players that you can do a ton of different things with. And so I categorize, what we can do with the core skills. You go to the main skill, and then you go to the micro skill, and then you go how to teach it. Right. And then you categorize them by color. So then, because obviously how you teach, an outside layup could be completely different from a person that's 7 years old versus a person that's 15. Right. So that's why I like to color them, because then, it's the same skill, but you have to teach it differently based on how old they are. And then in terms of how we structure the workouts, we love to do themes. So obviously, whatever this group or individual workout that we're doing, whatever they need most as a player, we'll theme the workout around that. And then all the skills we do within the workout is based off that theme. And I agree with you. Like, you cannot script workouts. You can have like broad structured time slots, which we kind of do, but it's very flexible, kind of depending on, if they're really struggling with this skill, we might take half the workout to do that. It kind of just, we play it by ear, but we have a base structure in terms of, warm up, whatever we're trying to focus on for our theme. Like if our theme's physicality, our ball handling, our finishing, our shooting, it's all based around that theme. And I think that's helped us the most, because it narrows down whatever our kids need most, which has seen the best results versus doing, say you do ball handling that's focused on a split drop, but there's no physicality or contact whatsoever. And then you go into finishing and it's all physicality, right? So that's why I think it's easier for kids to understand themes better and learn more from them versus when it's kind of scattered on different aspects.
100%. I love that. I think there's a lot of similarities within like what I was describing, what you were describing, but I
Yes.
love the red, yellow, green within that as well. And yeah, like I think kind of the bullet points I was describing would be essentially kind of like the themes. But I love how, people always say, I want to get better, with contact. Okay. Do you mean ball handling? Do you mean finishing? Do you mean, do you mean, there's a lot of different aspects. And I love that. That's a great way to structure it in terms of, all right, if we're going through contact, everything today, we're going to be going physicality things.
Yeah. And it's crazy how detailed you can get. Cause I've been literally working on this curriculum for dang near 2 years and I'm still not done.
Nice.
But that's kind of crazy how detailed things can get. But once you have, your curriculum built, it's much easier to teach it to others. Like you were saying on our last call, you have a couple people working for you now. But that's why it's so important to keep that same value, because you don't want, someone that's working for you to be teaching a skill differently than you would teach it. Detailed and not thinking that you're not, like, always go into as much detail as possible. And if you think you're being too detailed, you probably aren't in terms of being able to teach it to somebody else. But I totally agree with you. And then in terms of, for the listeners, block training versus variable training, we've mentioned it, but we haven't explained it yet. Yeah. Block training is like when your brain is pre-planning movement and you do the same movement over and over again. So if I catch the ball at the free throw line to shoot mid-range jumpers and I shoot 50 of them left to right every single time, my brain is pre-planning my movement, and it's a consistent muscle memory. And this is great if you're trying to work on new shot form or you're just starting basketball. Block training is absolutely amazing to build skill. But it's been statistically proven that variable gets you better in the game, because when we're in a game, we're making a move on a defender. I'm not thinking to myself, all right, I'm going to cross over left to right to get my defender. You kind of just read what they're doing and then you respond instinctively, right? So we're not pre-planning any movement with variable training. And that's why all my older kids and even myself, I've learned that I'm going to get way better when things are audio, visual, and just actual defense in front of you work, because then your body has to respond to it. It's not something you're telling your brain to do. But that's what we mean, listeners, when we're talking about block versus variable. But that's awesome that you were mentioning that you do some of that stuff, which is really cool.
Yeah, no, that's great. And yeah, I mean, I think, at different points in training and based on skill level, I think both are essential. Not to backtrack, but I did have one question. I know you talked about working, you kind of with your red, yellow, green stuff. Have you found that working with younger players has really helped you with the older players you work with and the more skilled players you work with?
That's a great question. In terms of being able to impact another player, I've definitely learned a ton of things from youth. Kind of just I can see how they respond to things I say and what they actually soak in. So I would say that's more towards like mental training and life stuff, but I can see what actually affects the kid. And that's definitely helped me with older kids to kind of see what they'll soak in, because older kids are a little more tricky with that life and mental stuff, just because, they're growing up, they're trying to figure out who they are. Too cool for school kind of comes into play a lot of the times, thinking they know everything, which I remember in high school, I thought I knew everything, which is very, very far from the truth. As you get older, you realize that there's so many things that you don't know. But I would say in terms of that life training aspect, in terms of youth, it's hard because what you do when you're really young matters so much for your game when you get older, because you're like a drop, like you're saying. It's very hard to just pick up a high schooler and change their complete stance of muscle memory, because they've done it for so many years. Same thing with this shot. So I would say it's hard in that aspect that's where training is completely different. It's more high schoolers. It's more kind of, you're working with what you got. It's already to a point, their muscle memory's kind of built the type of player they're going to be. So I would kind of like the themes. I'm going to work on whatever they're really good at. So if they're a 3-and-D player, I'm going to maximize that. I'm not going to be working on stuff that they're never going to use in a game. Whereas youth players, you can kind of build them into the player that you can imagine them being. And they have much more freedom in that aspect.
Yeah, I completely echo everything you said. I think, it's like when you're in 5th grade, you don't have a role, right? When you're a senior in high school, you might have a role. So definitely something that I keep in mind too. I've just found that, I know I mentioned the first 2 players I worked with, they were super, super skilled. And I think my gauge was a little off because of that. And so what I've learned over time is like, working with, like a fourth grader on a, like you said, outside layup, like what they're struggling with, I've seen, high schoolers struggle with the exact same, timing and rhythm, with their dribble step, and then into that, outside foot, outside hand finish. So it's like, it's crazy. I think how, at first I was like, oh, I want to work with just the elite players. But I found a ton of development in working with youth, and just like you said, it is fun being able to just kind of help shape them into the player they hope to become. So
I find it nothing. I love training high schoolers because I have way more freedom in terms of what we can train on from a basketball aspect,
right.
But it's much more fulfilling to me, like just watching this kid grow up, and you can kind of shape who they are to be a better version of themselves. Like that is just awesome to me. It's not that high schoolers aren't fulfilling to me whatsoever. It's just It's a different kind of, feeling when you watch a kid go from third grade to a freshman in high school, and you're like, dang, I've been with this kid for this long, and this is what he ended up being. It's cool. But yeah. I totally agree with that. And then that can kind of piggyback. We talked about life and mental training a little bit, and I love that you're into that stuff because not many trainers are. And I really, in 20 years, dude, I feel like that's all it's going to be. It's just so hard for people to, buy into mental training because it's not measurable versus shooting, right? If you shoot 500 shots a day, you're going to see your percentage go up because you can measure it by numbers. Whereas you can't measure, the type of thoughts you're having, whether you have the feeling of confidence or not, things like that. It's hard to measure. So it's hard for people to buy into it. But I'm telling you, that's going to be the most valuable thing in 20 years in terms of sports, in my opinion. But why don't we talk a little bit about your philosophies on mental training and life coaching in terms of for your players?
I mean, I think there's just so many players, myself included, who are or were held back just by the mental side.
Yep.
And so, I mean, you can have all the skill in the world. And I like when I watched, I was watching NBA games last night, and it's like these players are so elite mentally that the shots they're willing to take, like you said, the feeling of confidence that they have, to take some of these shots to play at that level in front of that many eyes. But yeah, I mean, in terms of mental training, I mean, it is so broad, like you said. For me, I really just think it comes down to care. So, I mean, I try to have every individual not individual, but, every person, whether it's individual session or a group session, know that they matter as a human being far more than they matter as a basketball player, one. And so I think that's, absolutely imperative, and it doesn't need to be instilled through another coach. But as a player out there, I mean, I think, having your soul identity wrapped into, who you are in terms of a basketball player, is extremely risky. And so, like, I know for me, if I played bad on Friday night, my weekend kind of sucked. It's like Saturday, I'm thinking about the game. Sunday, okay, we're getting in the gym. I'm working harder than I ever did because I played horrible. You know what I mean? So and not to say that you can't, use, losses or bad games as fuel to the fire, but, just knowing that, you as a human being have a lot more to offer to this world than just being able to put a ball in the hoop is kind of where I start from step one.
That's awesome. So you just spit gold right there in terms of identity. Tying your identity to basketball is extremely risky, which is so true. And that's the biggest thing I've learned this year, playing college basketball again, is surrendering to results and not letting performances define me. Like I was just like you. I'd be so down if I didn't play well, and then if I played really well, I'd be on a high, right? And that's a very, very risky and hard way to live, because it's just going to be such a roller coaster. Where if you surrender to a result and you realize that everything's in your best interest, like there's nothing you can do other than trying to become the best version of yourself, and everything else that happens to you, it's going to make you better, right? Even if it's the worst thing in the world, knowing that you're going to get through it and improve upon it, I think is huge. And like you said, basketball is a means to an end. It's going to end for absolutely everybody, whether parents don't like it or coaches don't like it, or people that are completely consumed by basketball don't like it. It's going to end. Right. So it's the things that you take away when basketball is gone. And I think that's the biggest thing for me. I always used to ask myself, like I legit would work out 4 hours a day or 4 workouts a day in high school. Like all I did was basketball. And I would ask myself, like, is this going to pay off for me? Because I wanted to go to the NBA. I wanted to go overseas and play professionally. I was like, if that doesn't happen, is this paying off for me? And it paid off for me in so many ways other than just the sport. And that's why that's literally the focus of my business, is making other people better outside of basketball. And that's why I think parents see the value in that. And I think that's why we've grown so much. But I think that's absolutely awesome that you said, don't tie your identity to basketball.
I think that's great. And it's just like you said, right? So, your goal was to maybe get overseas or play in the NBA. And for me, I wanted to play in college,
Mm-hmm.
or I wanted to, at least, looking back, I wanted to have, an amazing high school season, my senior year, be an amazing high school player. And, did I amount to that? Not really. Looking back, I would say I was, average or slightly above average. And so, although we maybe didn't hit our goals or hit our, results based kind of thinking, like you were saying, I think, that work ethic that we both had is helping us, far more than we even realize. I mean, I know, for me, like today, I had, a 6:30 a.m. session, 7:30 a.m. session this morning. And it's like, if I wasn't having, 5:30 practices in high school, like, would I have the drive to get up and work with this player? Like, probably not, just being fully honest. And so I think that's, important for all the listeners, just to realize that, whether or not you accomplish what you're set out to accomplish. I mean, I think it's gonna help you in ways, that maybe you don't realize tomorrow or even a year from now. But, in hindsight, you definitely can reap the rewards.
Yeah, that's awesome. You have a very similar mentality to me, I would say.
Yeah.
And then the last thing on the document that I see is personal growth and development. So it kind of ties into that. But did you kind of elaborate what you wanted to talk about in this section?
Yeah, I mean, and part of it's just piggybacking off of what you said. I mean, I think now it's like, okay, I didn't want my sole identity to be a basketball player,
Mm-hmm.
and now it's like, I don't want my sole identity to be a basketball trainer. I mean, it is, for both of us, such a huge part of our life. We have, all the players we work with. We now have other trainers that are working, with us, and so it's definitely a lot to manage. Trying to impact, ways, farther than the game, just like you stated. But yeah, I love what you said about, how kind of everything is in your best interest and an opportunity to learn and grow. And I know that's a great quote from I think a book that we probably both read.
I was going to say that's in a lot of the Lucas Jaden and
Yeah.
Joshua Metcalf books.
Yeah, I definitely can't credit those guys enough in terms of just kind of shaping my mental perspective. But yeah, I mean, it's constant. It's never like you've arrived. I mean, mental training and just overall life skills, they never stop. And so, yeah, just looking to continue to grow and whether it's, good or bad. I mean, I'm sure you've had a ton of obstacles, throughout your years, and
Mm-hmm.
it's just, handling them as they come and learning as much as you can. So that's kind of where I am.
That's awesome. What would you say the number one way you learn right now is? Like, do you watch videos? Is it social media? Is it reading? What do you think grows you the most?
I do read a lot, and I love
Awesome.
all of the Train to Be Clutch books. But truthfully, I mean, I think it's more so from the interactions I have, and whether that's, reaching out to other trainers or other people who, maybe are other entrepreneurs running their own business. I mean, at the end of the day, we're kind of entrepreneurs, and, kind of blazing our own trail, if you would. So I think just having those interactions, and then even from like just a basketball training perspective, like I've learned so much from the kids that I work with. Just to give you like a great example, one of the trainers who's working with me right now, his name is Emmanuel Obi. He played 2 years overseas in England. And so, like, he would come to me, prior to being on staff. We would constantly get workouts in, and like it was almost like the conversation, like, like he'd do something, hey, like what did that feel like? Help me out, like, and he's asking me things, I'm asking him things. We're both just learning on the fly, and it was very early on that we could tell we shared the same love for the game and the same love for just overall development, both on and off the court. So yeah, I think books might be a close second to the conversations, but
Yeah. No,
What about for you?
I would say I'm a big reader. I've learned over time that I enjoy stories about people and what they've learned from their life. Because it's kind of like it's a preface. It kind of gets you to understand what you're going to be facing and can help prepare you for it. But I would totally agree. People is probably the best way to learn, and not to talk about relationships, but in terms I've learned over time, like I always used to think like I wanted to marry someone exactly like me. And over time, I've realized like that's why opposites attract, is because you can learn if someone's, obviously you have to have the same core values, but you can
Right.
learn from your partner if they have skills that they're really good at and then you're not good at, right? So then that person improves you. Whereas if you're the same person, right, you're not really taking away anything from that experience. But I think that's an awesome example, kind of what you were talking about, is that you learn from people and experiences to better yourself. But I'm a firm believer that we can learn from everybody. I remember growing up, like it's all about age, right? If they're the same age as me, right, I can't learn from them. But if they're older than me, right, they have authority and I can learn from them. Even now, like I watch my kids do things, like little kids. Like I was doing a speech in front of this school one time, and I was with a bunch of fourth graders, and I was asking them to raise their hand for something, and none of them would do that. And I asked them all, right? I was like, if you were in kindergarten, do you think all of you would be raising your hand right now? And they all shook their head and they go, yes. And I said, so see, this is a great example of how you can learn from everybody. When you're so young, you don't even have anxiety or fear about anything. And so that just means fear is energy, right? It's all makeup in your own head, which is preventing you from raising your hand as you get older. But I think that's awesome, because you truly can learn from absolutely anybody, whether they're 20 years younger than you or 20 years older than you or the same age, right? It really doesn't matter. Everyone has their uniqueness about themselves and can better yourself in learning. So I think that was an awesome point.
Yeah, no, I love the example you gave. It reminds me kind of I've been doing a lot of research on just like coping with anxiety, and I know like
Mm-hmm.
basketball training, in terms of mental training, a lot of people have performance anxiety, and then also off the court there's a ton of various anxieties that people deal with as well. And just like you were saying, like the fear to raise your hand, most fear, and like for me, I think about, there were times when I passed up a lot of open looks. So like
Mm-hmm.
for me, I was just worried. It's usually a combination, or it's usually one of the two, or a combination of both. That fear of failure or the fear of judgment. And so, that's one thing I like to bring up to a lot of players, and just helping them through that, like, kind of that little voice in the back of your head saying, like, what if I airball? What if I miss?
Uh-huh.
Like, and I used to think like I was the only one thinking those, or, you're probably in class, thinking about raising your hand, and you're like, oh, maybe I don't want to, but, realistically, there's probably, 20 people thinking the exact same thing.
Yep.
And even, relating that to basketball, like even the NBA guys are going through the same thing. Like, the fact that, we think that they don't feel nerves, or that they don't
Mm-hmm.
feel, various pressures is just inhumane, more or less. So I love that point as well.
That is an awesome point. And I think that's one thing I've learned is like, I always used to look up to people that were older than me or writing books and like, dang, these guys got it figured out. And at the end of the day, once you realize that nobody has it figured out,
Right.
that's what's going to propel you over fear and anxiety, because like everybody has it. Everybody has those thoughts. The people that are your idols and household names and things of that nature, they just decided to do it, even though in spite of that feeling. And it doesn't mean they still don't get the feeling. Like you said, like NBA players, we look at them and they're like, these guys they have ultimate confidence. They have no self-doubt. And they just decide to not let it stop them from doing something. So I think that is an awesome point, because nobody has it figured out. We all have anxiety and we all have fear.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, just like full transparency, like one of my biggest fears was like, okay, I didn't play college basketball. Why in the world is a college basketball player going to want to come to me?
Mm-hmm.
And, you work with one of them and you realize, okay, like, you're providing value, and you're learning from them, and they're learning from you. And then and now it's like, I love working with college guys. I want to work with, and I've worked with a couple, overseas players and things like that. And it's, I mean, it's not that you don't have any anxiety. I mean, it's just something, it's much less. And so
Yeah,
I think that's awesome stuff, and just willing to take a risk, and willing to, fall flat on your face. That's how you're going to learn. So
that is an awesome point, because that's something I haven't thought of. But yeah, if you provide good value, it really does not matter what your background is. If you're helping this player do whatever they're paying you to do, right, you're going to be just fine, which I think is a great point. This has been a great conversation. Is there anything you kind of wanted to add that we didn't go over, or ask me any other questions that I didn't ask you?
not a ton. I mean, I guess I know like the off season and the summer swing of things are kind of on the horizon. What do you have going in the near future and this summer?
So we do a 3v3 camp every year in the summer.
Nice, I saw that.
And the reason for that is because that's the best way for us to maximize players per hour. So we can get 8 players in 1 hour that way. And we still do training on the side.
Right.
But we've been doing it for 5 or 6 years, and every year parents and kids just absolutely love the thing because you get half skills and half games.
That's perfect.
Yeah, exactly. And so,
Fantastic. Yeah.
yeah, so they're learning and they're having a ton of fun at the same time. So it's like the best of both worlds. But this year has been a little more stressful because we have a lot more kids. So it gets a lot organizing things, but I'm super excited just because I haven't trained in 9 months. All the people that have been training for Close the Gate have been doing it for me. I'm super excited to be back and just with the kids.
Yeah, that's a lot to look forward to. But yeah, definitely, I totally can relate to it's hard. The scheduling aspect can be tedious as well, and that's one thing that nobody kind of sees behind the scenes. But no, that's awesome, and best of luck with that. That sounds great.
So do you plan on just doing more training basically throughout the day?
Yeah. Very similar to kind of like you said, the 3-on-3 aspect. I'm like I've started some youth group sessions going right now. And really going to try to just do that at every level. So just kind of get a college group where, I think, like you said, we'll cap it at 8, where we can get, 4 on each side of the gym and, half skills, and then, half probably some small sided games, and then some 3-on-3 or 4-on-4. So really looking to do that at every age level. But yeah, adding on the 2 trainers that I mentioned, now allows us to have sessions on both ends of the gym. So that's great. We just resurfaced the floor last weekend, so the traction has really gone up. That was a good learning experience, standing and resurfacing a floor that I had no idea what goes into that, but that was cool. So yeah, gym's in a little bit better condition, and just excited to get more individual and group sessions going, and hopefully going to do some camps as well. So excited for that.
That's awesome. And I think I saw your story about that where you're squeaking your shoes.
Yeah. That was neat. Cool. I mean, we would buy those like Dick's sticky mats like crazy. I mean, it's an old church gym.
Yeah.
So it's just, you don't want to see players slip, and I was worried, somebody's going to get injured more or less. And so luckily had a guy help out from a flooring company, and he knew exactly what to do, gave us the supplies, and we went from there. So
that's awesome. That is awesome, Trent. Well, thank you so much for being on Off the Court. We're definitely going to have to do this again because we are very similar in our beliefs, which is kind of cool. I'll let you know when this podcast gets edited, and I don't know when it'll be posted. It'll probably be in a few weeks, but I'll let you know when that happens, and then we can stay in touch because you're in Madison, so I'm sure we'll meet up at some point soon.
Yeah, no, definitely would absolutely love to. And yeah, appreciate you for having me on and more or less just connecting. I mean, I think it's awesome. Not that age matters at all, but we're similar age and going through similar things. And what I've found is like, there's not a lot of people doing what we do. So it's great to connect and learn from each other and be able to bounce good and bad off each other. So
that's awesome. All right. So thank you so much, Trent. And then we'll stay in touch. Sound good?
Perfect. Sounds great. Hopefully my audio was good.
Yes, it was.
All
Peace out,
great.
Trent.
Yes, appreciate it. Have a great rest of your day.
You too. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode of Off the Court. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please don't forget to leave reviews if you haven't yet. This helps us with engagement and helps us rank higher to make an influence on more basketball lives. I also strongly encourage you guys to check out our free ebook download that's 25 pages long, How to Unlock the Mental Side of the Game. I was a player that was constantly grinding and constantly working, and it was really hard for me not to see results from the amount of work I was putting in. But this ebook that I wrote dives exactly into those types of questions. I was completely ignoring the most important part of basketball, which is the mental side of the game. So the 25-page ebook that I wrote is for you guys to give yourselves a leg up on your competition and almost like a secret weapon. I call it the basketball cheat code. Also, check out our website, ctghoops.com. On there, we got tons of programs that you guys can download to make yourselves a better basketball player. We have the CTG Productivity Notebook, helping you guys become addicted to productivity. Of course, in-person training. We are located now in multiple cities. And then we have the CTG blog, free education on becoming your best basketball self. Lastly, follow all our social media pages at CTG Hoops, where we post multiple times a day, trying to make you the best player and person that you can be. All the links for these are down in the description below. Thank you guys so much. Make sure you guys check out all the other episodes of Off the Court, and make sure you're ready for next week's episode. I'm Coach Jack. We out, baby. Peace.